The fifth tool for supporting the retention strategy is customer retention metrics. Such key performance indicators help the business understand changes in customer retention, including the impact of business cycles and performance on this. This provides a roadmap for success which helps the business project customer engagement and retention levels so as to visualize what needs to be done to drive and sustain good performance. The first KPI we're going to discuss are customer retention metrics. All businesses in nearly every industry suffer from churn, and this can really slow business growth even for a business which is acquiring customers rapidly. According to research, the media and professional services industry had the highest churn rate at 84%, while retail has the lowest at 63%. The COVID-19 pandemic has worsened customer loss over the years, so churn post-COVID is much higher. However, the point to note is that most businesses lose at a minimum over 50% of customers they acquire in a typical year where there's no pandemic. Since you can't track what you can't measure, it's important to regularly compute customer retention metrics and utilize such insights to mitigate churn, as lost customers translate to lost current and future revenue. Measuring and tracking retention KPIs helps the business understand how effective it is in achieving the retention objective. The first of these retention metrics is the customer churn rate. The customer churn rate is the rate at which a business is losing customers, expressed as a percentage of the total customers at the start of a period. Customer loss is usually a slow fade and happens when customers gradually reduce their purchasing frequency or stop purchasing altogether. Churn can be measured over various periods of time, but it is important to do so per the typical business cycle, though monthly or quarterly, that is, every 3 months could work better for businesses which are not subscription-based. The customer churn rate is measured in 2 steps. Step 1. Compute the number of customers who may have churned during the period. Customers churned is computed as the number of customers at the start of the period less the number of customers at the end of the period. Step 2. Compute the churn rate. The customer churn rate is computed as the difference between the number of customers at the start of the period and those at the end of the period, divided by the number of customers at the start of the period, or customers churned during the period divided by number of customers at the start of the period. You may consider any customer who made a purchase during the previous period being part of the opening base at the start of the period. Let's use an example to illustrate how to compute customer churn rate on a quarterly basis. For a given year, let's assume that customers who transacted at least once between January and end of March, that is quarter 1, are 152. Those who transacted between April and June, that is quarter 2, are 130. To compute customers who may have churned during the period, it is 152 minus 130, which gives you 22. This means that the churn rate is 22 over 152, which gives you 14.4%. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the average retail churn rate was 5 to 7%, but as we've just seen, retail sector churn in 2020 was 63%. We can therefore assume that this huge variance, from 5 to 7% pre-COVID to 63% in 2020, is attributable to COVID-19. It is therefore very important to track churn as a key measure of the retention strategy over the different business seasons and cycles. This would enable the business predict how these metrics play out over the course of a typical cycle, as a reflection of customer movements, and the impact of these changes on overall business performance. Tracking the churn rate is also important for implementing measures to reverse or minimize such customer loss. Knowing how churn progresses during the different business seasons is important, as an unusually high churn rate could indicate trouble, that a business is losing customers at an unreasonably high rate for whatever reasons. Tracking churn is also important for helping the business gauge its retention effectiveness relative to the market or competition, so where possible, benchmark your business against industry standards, then investigate why the business is struggling with customer retention so as to fix the situation. Lastly, take action to retain customers before they exit you and shift to the competition permanently. The second KPI we're going to discuss is the customer retention rate. The customer retention rate represents the percentage of customers who were retained and made a purchase during the period. This metric is therefore inversely proportional to the customer churn rate, and provides an alternative way of tracking customer loss, from a retention perspective rather than from a churn perspective. The customer retention rate is measured by first computing the percentage of churned customers, then subtracting this percentage from 1. Or simply put, 1 minus the customer churn rate. Based on our hypothetical example, the customer retention rate is 1 minus 14.4%, which gives you 85.5%. 14.4% is the churn rate we computed in the first example. Tracking customer engagement using either of the two KPIs is key to the successful implementation of the retention strategy. It's time to put your learnings into practice by computing the 3 customer retention metrics for your business. 1. The number of customers who may have churned. 2. The customer churn rate, and 3. The customer retention rate. There's no template for this exercise, so review the lesson and note down the formulas, then use your spreadsheet tool to do the computations. You will, however, first need to analyze your customer base to establish the number of customers at the start and at the end of the period, so as to estimate the number of customers who may have churned during the period. Going forward, ensure you refresh these computations on a quarterly basis at the very least, to track churn against the retention strategy initiatives you implement. Once you're ready, let's proceed to the next lesson.